Okay, let's dive right into this provocative idea. Palmer Luckey, the founder of defense tech giant Anduril, is making a really radical proposition. He argues that America absolutely must fundamentally shift its global military strategy. We're talking about transitioning entirely away from fighting other people's wars and instead supplying the weapons for them to fight their own. It is a massive departure from decades of established U.S. foreign policy.
Welcome to today's Explainer. We are going to neutrally break down the wide-ranging and honestly often controversial arguments made by Palmer Luckey regarding what he sees as the broken state of U.S. defense, the growing military threat from China, and the reality of how artificial intelligence is going to dictate the future of warfare. We're looking strictly at the ideas he recently laid out, mapping exactly how he believes America has to adapt.
To unpack his pretty dense worldview, we've got a 5-part roadmap for today: the world's gun store, fixing defense incentives, the China challenge, AI and autonomous fleets, and finally, the tech patriotism shift.
Let's start with Section 1, the world's gun store, supplying allies, not fighting their wars.
This is really the whole foundation of Luckey's argument, moving the United States from being the world's police to acting as the world's gun store. He posits that Americans simply do not have the political appetite for massive, boots-on-the-ground wars anymore. He argues the public is totally exhausted by these multi-trillion-dollar, multi-decade slogs where the benefits just seem completely diffuse. So instead of sending troops, he says the U.S. needs to operate like a highly competitive business that equips its allies. But, to be a successful global gun store, you actually have to act like a good store. You've got to deliver products on time, keep your inventory fully stocked, and crucially, acknowledge that countries actually have other shopping options today, namely competitors like Russia and China.
Moving right along to Section 2, Fixing Defense Incentives, Transforming Pentagon Procurement.
So, how do we actually build and supply the weapons to keep this store stocked? Well, there's a massive economic divide at play here. Luckey argues that traditional defense contractors operate on what's called a cost-plus model. Under this system, the government funds the research, and the contractor actually makes more profit when a project takes longer and costs more money. It fundamentally disincentivizes speed. Contrast that with his company, Anduril, which operates on a Silicon Valley product model. They invest their own private money, taking on the financial risk themselves to prioritize speed, drive down costs, and just sell a finished, working product directly to the government.
To really grasp how backward these incentives are, Luckey asks us to imagine a pretty relatable scenario. Imagine hiring a home renovation contractor for your house, but the contract is structured so that the contractor makes a larger profit simply by dragging out the timeline and continuously inflating the budget. I mean, you would literally never agree to that for your kitchen. Yet he points out that this is exactly how hundreds of billions of taxpayer dollars are spent on national defense.
And to prove that the product model actually works better, Luckey highlights some truly unprecedented speed. 556 days. That is exactly how long it took for Anduril's FQ-44 Fury autonomous fighter jet to go from a signed contract to its very first test flight. By using their own capital and prioritizing agility, they're trying to completely shatter those decades-long development cycles we're so used to seeing in the military.
So what's the financial engine behind that kind of speed? Reinvestment. He points out that legacy defense companies typically reinvest a really low single-digit percentage, think maybe 1 to 3% of their revenue, back into internal R&D. But modern defense tech companies like his, they are reinvesting essentially 100% of their revenue right back into R&D to drive faster innovation. It's a playbook borrowed straight from early Silicon Valley giants.
All right, Section 3, the China challenge: efficiency, manufacturing, and patents.
Let's shift our focus to how Luckey views the contrasting efficiencies between the U.S. and its primary adversary, China. Looking at the geopolitical landscape, there is a massive strategic disparity. Luckey notes that the U.S. is burdened with a huge multi-front global responsibility. We are trying to build a military that can fight literally everywhere, in every climate, against entirely diverse enemies. China, on the other hand, is hyper-efficient because they are optimizing for a singular, highly focused military goal: an amphibious invasion of Taiwan and securing those surrounding islands. They don't have to solve everyone's problems, they just have to solve one highly specific problem.
This leads to a rather alarming quote from Luckey. He states, "Patents are Chinese instruction manuals." According to him, America's intellectual property system, which was, designed to foster innovation, is currently being actively weaponized against the United States.
He explains that in our globalized economy, patent disclosures are just a massive loophole. Think about it. A Western company spends millions on R&D and files a public patent. Instantly, foreign state actors can simply log on and download those exact schematics. They completely bypass the massive upfront R&D costs, which lets them manufacture the technology much cheaper and way faster, all while the Western company is just sitting there waiting out a 20-year exclusivity period that their adversaries completely ignore anyway.
So what's the fix? Well, Luckey fiercely advocates for massively expanding the classified patent process. He argues that we actually must allow tech giants like Google to patent critical advancements, especially in areas like artificial intelligence, while keeping those patents entirely hidden from the public domain. He sees this as absolutely essential to level the R&D playing field and protect American tax dollars.
Moving on to Section 4, AI and autonomous fleets, deconstructing the myths of future warfare.
When looking to the future of warfare, Luckey directly refutes all those popular anxieties and Hollywood myths about AI in combat. Contradicting prominent figures who've warned about unpredictable AI chaos, Luckey argues that military AI is fundamentally misunderstood by the public. Defense AI is not some unpredictable hallucinating chatbot. Instead, it's deterministic, formally verifiable software. It's programmed to reliably identify specific enemy signatures, like, say, the thermal outline of a destroyer, and it will respond perfectly and identically to that data every single time without any of that rogue Terminator behavior.
And to apply this kind of deterministic AI, he introduces a wild concept he affectionately calls Twinkie ships. The idea here is to build autonomous or lightly manned naval ships, seal them in massive argon gas wrappers to prevent any corrosion, and just store them perfectly preserved in dry dock for decades. They'd require zero maintenance and zero crew until a war actually breaks out.
So why does this matter so much? Because Luckey suggests the U.S. Navy realistically needs over 1,000 ships, not the roughly 300 it currently has. But here's the catch. The U.S. simply doesn't have the human personnel to man a fleet 3 times that size. The math just doesn't work. The only solution is drastic automation. By using AI, you could reduce an aircraft carrier's crew from, say, 5,000 people down to just 120. When you do that, the entire economic burden of the Navy shifts from constant daily upkeep to just the initial manufacturing cost. It's a real game changer.
And finally, Section 5. The tech patriotism shift, bridging Silicon Valley and the Pentagon. This brings us to the cultural conclusion of his whole argument, focusing on the deep ideological divide between the tech sector building these tools and the military that needs to deploy them. Luckey contrasts 2 totally different mindsets. On one side, you have the traditional Davos man of early Silicon Valley, these transnational leaders who view themselves as borderless globalists and often flat-out refuse to work with the U.S. military. On the other side, he identifies a rising wave of what he calls tech patriots. These are emerging founders who fundamentally believe America's most innovative minds absolutely must be put to work, developing the tools needed to hold foreign adversaries at bay.
He actually warns that this national divorce between top engineering talent and the Pentagon is a highly dangerous, historically unprecedented experiment. We can see this tension clearly on a timeline, from cultural rifts growing in the 2010s to Google employees openly revolting and forcing the cancellation of Pentagon AI contracts in 2018 to even more protests recently. Yet at the exact same time, defense-focused startups like Anduril are successfully scaling into the billions, which proves there really is a shifting tide of tech talent willing to work on national security.
Which brings us to the end of today's explainer. I want to leave you with this pretty provocative thought to chew on. As global threats evolve way faster than our legacy systems can keep up, is the American tech sector actually ready to fully step into the role of the world's gun store? The answer to that question may very well define the next century of global stability. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll catch you next time.